On this episode of Still Loading, the GameCube is 20 years old. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of the Still Loading podcast. I'm your host, Josh Koval, and today we are celebrating the 20th birthday, the 20th anniversary of the Nintendo GameCube. Next year, it can legally drink in the United States, but I couldn't do it alone. So with me is my buddy Veach from Bite Size Pixel. Oh my God. Veach, how are you doing?
I'm all right, man. How you been?
Not too bad. I'm gonna cut out my error there, so everyone's gonna be like, "Why is Veach laughing so hard?" Life's a beach. That's all I can say.
That's right. Yep.
There we go. So, Veach, I had you on because, one, you're a huge GameCube fan. You were actually on earlier this year to discuss GameCube Hidden Gems, and you've actually been pushing for this episode for a while. I remember when you were like reaching out to me, you're like, "Oh, let's do more episodes. Let's collab more together." And you really wanted to be on the GameCube one. I'm like, I got to wait till the 20th anniversary. We're this close. We just got to wait a couple more months. And by a couple more months, that was like a year. But
yeah.
So this has been a long time coming. But with us in spirit are Mike and Neil of the GameCube Was Cool podcast. Neil was supposed to join Veach and I, but unfortunately, due to some scheduling conflicts, he could not make it. And actually, my buddy Tristan was also last minute. I asked if he wanted to join us because it was at his house that I first played the GameCube. But unfortunately, that also couldn't happen. But regardless, they are with us in spirit and guiding us with their guiding GameCube light. I don't know where I'm going with this anymore. We were talking about the GameCube. It's the 20th anniversary. So before we dive into this, let's just get this right off the bat. The GameCube's release date, it was released on September 14th, 2001 in Japan and on November 18th, 2001 in North America. So we're kind of releasing this close to that date. And before we really dive in earnest, Veach, what are some of your memories of the GameCube and why are you such a passionate GameCube fan?
I mean, I can tell you that the earliest memory that I have in regards to the GameCube was my grandfather actually bought me my GameCube for my birthday. So you said it came out in 2001?
2001.
So, how old was I in 2001? I think I was just entering... No, I wasn't even in high school yet. So I was in junior high. So I think I was like in 7th or 8th grade. My grandfather bought it for me for my birthday. And the first game that I had for the GameCube was what was it? Amazing Spider-Man? Or was it just Spider-Man?
I think it's Amazing Spider-Man because if I remember correctly, there was the Mike and Neil from the GameCube Was Cool podcast did an episode on the Spider-Man games, and I believe the Amazing Spider-Man was one of their favorites. Specifically, each one of them had different favorite Spider-Man games, and one of them was one of them preferred the Amazing Spider-Man over. I think Spider-Man 2 was the other one they really loved.
Spider-Man 2 was really, really good. But so it was so this was before the Amazing Spider-Man movie came out. So this was just called Spider-Man.
Ultimate Spider-Man, that's what it was. Sorry, I don't know if that's the one you're thinking of, but
no. I mean, I did play Ultimate. I played all the Spider-Man games on the system, but the first game that I had was just Spider-Man.
Okay.
And it was the only game that I had for a very long time before I ended up getting any money to like start buying more games. So I played the crap out of this game. I remember that you could web swing and like your web would just like go up into the air and not connect to anything. And then you would just swing around like that. And then what I really liked about it for some reason when I was younger is Bruce Campbell did the voiceover for like the tutorial.
Really?
And,
okay.
Yeah. Cause he was in the Spider-Man movies. He had like little cameos in the Spider-Man movies.
I don't
So
even remember. I mean, it's been so long since I've seen the Spider-Man movies, but yeah, go on.
yeah, but so he would always do the voiceover work for the tutorial levels, and this was like before I even knew who Bruce Campbell was. So I would I would watch. I When I eventually saw Evil Dead, I was like, "Oh my god, it's the guy from Spider-Man." You know?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't feel too bad. I still have not seen Evil Dead all the way through. I know that's a sin, but I can't do horror movies, so I tried watching it, couldn't finish it.
It's really like the original?
Dude, it wasn't even that like scary. It was actually
No,
like
not at all.
the practical gore of it really like freaked me out. I don't know why
Oh,
it
I
was, but
gotcha.
and it's weird because like I'll watch Saw and be fine. Like it's still uncomfortable, but it doesn't like I don't know. It just doesn't freak me out. I don't know what it was that maybe I was just in a weird mood at the time, but like I also don't like horror movies. They generally freak me out, even if it's
I
something that's like as dumb as like the original Halloween movie freaked me out, and I watched it for the first time like a year ago. So I was like a 30-year-old man still kind of like uncomfortable by this like 40-year-old movie.
That's funny. I mean,
50-year-old movie just almost. But go on. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I don't want to get too off topic, but that was like I would say that was my earliest memory of the GameCube. And was there a follow-up question?
I was just going to
Were you
ask
just
like
talking about
why are you
GameCube?
such a GameCube fan still? I know you're very passionate
Uh,
about this system.
I don't know. I think it was just like it's kind of like the same thing with the 64. It's like those early years, those like developmental years, I think you become super super fond of the experiences that you had,
Mhm.
because a lot of those were like first time experiences, like with the 64 transitioning from 2D into 3D. Like we're never going to be able to experience seeing a 3D game for the first time again, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like understanding like 3D game mechanics and like seeing a 3D environment for the first time. So like with the GameCube, I think that we were so used to 3D at that time that like once we started seeing like higher graphical fidelity and what games could do with physics and stuff like that, especially like in the Nintendo realm, because a lot of the realistically a lot of the games on the 64 were pretty primitive as far as like any sort of physics
Yeah.
or
They're very straightforward mechanically,
yeah.
just very like even like really good games like Mario 64 and Banjo-Kazooie, they're very and like Ocarina of Time obviously and GoldenEye, they're
Hmm.
very straightforward with their mechanics. Still
Hmm.
very impressive for the time, but like very straightforward. And then you get to this, I think this is considered the sixth generation, the GameCube, PS2, Xbox is considered the sixth generation of consoles. And they at this point is when you really start to see them like worlds started to get increase exponentially in size. I mean, this is the era where like Grand Theft Auto became a thing, and this is the
Hmm.
era where you had like Half-Life 2 is technically part of this era too, with like physics puzzles. I mean, that was more towards the end of the sixth generation, and it was mainly for PC, but you get the idea. Like this
Yeah.
era really started to experiment with what you could do in a 3D space and the size and expansiveness of a 3D space.
Yeah, and I think that because we were like having all these new experiences, um like I'm sure if I was like a PlayStation 2 kid at the time, I would be super super attached to whatever was being put out
Oh, that was me, yeah.
in that era. So it's just it's I mean it really is like it's just a lot of like nostalgia because I that's what I experienced growing up is why I'm so attached to it. And I find myself like regularly going back and forth between what my favorite console is, and it's
Mhm.
always either the GameCube, the Nintendo 64, or the Dreamcast. And I bounce around between those three fairly often, and I think it's hard to have like a definitive answer in regards to that.
I feel you on that, like, I think I did an episode on what my favorite console is a year or 2 ago, and it ended up being the PS2, but the way I approached it wasn't necessarily from an emotional standpoint, it was more just like, "Well, let me look at each console from each generation and determine which is my favorite from each generation." So,
Right.
If you look at the fourth generation, which was NES, Master System, that kind of stuff, it was NES. When you look at the fifth generation of Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo, I'm blanking on the others, TurboGrafx 16, stuff like that. It was Super Nintendo, and then so on and so forth. And I did that with each of them, and then I would take my favorites from each one of those generations, and I'd be like, well, do I like the Super Nintendo more than the NES? And then do I like the Super Nintendo more than the PlayStation 2? And then do I like the PlayStation 2 more than, I think the PS3 was my favorite from the 7th gen, so on and so forth.
Right.
So that's kind of how I approached it. But like for me, my favorite console usually is either the Super Nintendo or N64, even though I don't have nostalgia for the Super Nintendo, but I do have nostalgia for the 64. GameCube is at a weird spot where it's like I love this generation of Nintendo for all the weird stuff they tried in the GameCube. I mean, look at Luigi's Mansion, look at Pikmin, look at Chibi Robo, look at Nintendo tried so many unique game ideas during this generation, and some of them worked, some of them didn't. And I love that they tried it, and I just wish I could have experienced it more at the time, and I would have more nostalgia for it. But let's kind of dive into what, like, the development of the console itself. So back in 1997, there was a company called ArtX that was formed by 20 former members of a company named Silicon Graphics. For those who are familiar with Silicon Graphics, they are the company that partnered with Nintendo to make the N64. So 20 former members of the company that helped make basically the graphics system of the N64 split off and created ArtX. And their whole thing was they were developing, and their whole thing was they partnered with Nintendo in 1998 and worked on the design of the GameCube. They worked on the system logic specifically and the graphics processor, which they codenamed the graphics processor for this Flipper, which we're going to tie back into later. You may already know where I'm going with this,
Yeah.
Veach. So the console was listed under various code names. At one point, it was called N2000. Another point, it could have been called StarCube, though that's not 100% confirmed. It seems like back prior to the year the GameCube launched, or back prior to the GameCube's launch, Nintendo in like Sweden or something like that. I forget what it was. They filed a patent, or they filed like a trademark for StarCube in a couple times in like that one European country, whichever it is, not in any other country, just there. So that's interesting. So it could have been called StarCube for all we know. And it was also maybe considered the Nintendo Advance, but publicly, when Nintendo finally announced the console, it was known as Dolphin, Project Dolphin. Hence why I mentioned before the GPU's name is Flipper.
Right. Well, you know what I've heard too? If you open up like the board or something, if you open up the casing, the housing, like somewhere on the board, there's supposed to be like a picture of a dolphin or something.
That is actually true. That is very true. I don't know exactly how you get to it, but that is true. If you open up the console and get to the board, there's a dolphin on one of the chips. I'm guessing the GPU, but I don't 100%. I'm not 100% certain. IBM designed the CPU for the system, and it was codenamed Gecko. And later on, though, ArtX was acquired by ATI in April of 2000, which is why on the front of GameCubes you see that ATI sticker.
Yep.
So that's just a little bit of background about the development of the system itself. Just stuff that I found interesting. Like, there's obviously a lot of information of like very specific technical jargon, but I just kind of hit some quick points that I thought was interesting, which company designed it, that kind of stuff. And what's interesting about the GameCube's launch is that it was the first Nintendo console since the NES, which you kind of give a pass for, that didn't launch with a Mario title. The NES eventually had a pack-in Mario title, but when it first launched in the United States, it just had Duck Hunt. It was like Duck Hunt and
the Rob the Robot game.
Yeah. And eventually they did have, it was very shortly after, like you consider the technical launch. Mario wasn't there with the technical launch, but it was like basically in the beginning. It's almost 1-to-1. But the GameCube did not launch with a Super Mario game. You had obviously Super Mario World for the Super Nintendo, and then you had Mario 64 for the Nintendo 64. But they did not do that with this. Instead, they launched with Luigi's Mansion, which at the time was not a popular decision with the public. Do you remember that at all?
So I do remember, God, I do remember hearing that people did not like Luigi's Mansion. I did not get Luigi's Mansion myself until I was in high school, actually working at GameStop.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so a lot of my GameCube games I didn't really get until I was in high school and had a part-time job. But I know for some reason people didn't like Luigi's Mansion, and when I played it, I was like, I don't understand why this got so like this made people so upset. But I feel like back then, a lot of people were just mad at Nintendo for anything that came out.
I mean,
Like
nothing's
people,
really changed.
yeah, I mean, but like people, like I remember, people didn't. Some people, I don't know. I feel like people didn't like Super Mario Sunshine for some reason. They weren't about it,
Yeah,
and
I mean,
Wind Waker
yeah,
got like Wind Waker, like everybody got like in a big stink about. It
because of the
was
art style.
yeah, yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, it's the interesting thing about the GameCube, and I think that one of the reasons the GameCube market has exploded because of the pandemic. Like you've seen the prices for GameCube games, dude. Like they're through the roof
Dude,
right now.
not only that, everything is through the roof. I've been expanding. I've been buying like 64 and GameCube games recently, and um, I saw a 64 game. What the heck was it? I think it was either Winback or Hybrid Heaven,
Okay.
and it was like the guy was selling like a bunch of boxed N64 games, and the boxes were beat. Can I curse on your podcast? I
Yeah.
can't remember.
Yeah.
The boxes were beat to shit, like torn, just poorly taken care of, and the guy wanted like a couple $100 per game.
There's a whole thing. Like I won't go into it now, but have you heard about
The
whole
WADA
the
thing.
WADA scandal?
Yeah, I heard
Yeah.
about all that. And it's
Did,
like I think that's a big cause of why
mhm.
prices are inflated is because everyone thinks they're sitting on gold.
Yes, and they're not. It's gonna pop at some point because most collectors aren't. Most collectors are on a budget. You have those, those echelon, those higher echelon people that just have like fuck you levels of money, who just throw it at like
Yeah.
everything. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, I think one of the reasons that GameCube games for some reasons, all of like you were saying, all games have spiked in price right now. All the
Mhm.
collectible market has spiked for video game collectors. But for some reason, GameCube specifically, it might be dying down a bit now, but especially last year, it just skyrocketed. And I think one of the reasons that GameCube has become such a desirable collector's system is
Yeah.
just because the games for it at the time did not sell. They sold well comparative to like the attach rate of the console, but since the console overall didn't sell well, there's a lot less copies, and there's still millions of
Yeah.
copies of a lot of these games out there, but it's one of those things where it didn't sell well at the time because everyone, like we were saying, people didn't like Wind Waker for the art style. People were mad that Luigi's Mansion was not a Mario game. Then
Mhm.
you finally did get Mario Sunshine. Mario Sunshine, I think, has aged decently, but playing it now, there's like the physics
I,
are a little janky.
I mean,
And by adding the flood mechanic, it just wasn't something that people were expecting in their
yeah.
Mario platform game. It doesn't mean that
Yeah.
it's bad. It's just at the time people weren't expecting it. So you have this whole system of these games that are super great, but completely underappreciated at the time of their release. And now people look back and be like, oh, you know what? Wind Waker is actually one of the best Zelda games. You know what? Sunshine's really not that bad. Oh, how about this? Luigi's Mansion now has 2 sequels because hell, it's a really good game. And then you even have Chibi Robo that made a couple sequels. You have Pikmin that came out of this generation.
Mhm.
Metroid Prime revolutionized stuff. So you have this whole console of games that was pretty much known for Smash Brothers just because of the popularity of Smash Brothers, and
Mhm.
it got super undersold at the time. And now people are like, "Oh, you know what? There's probably a lot of really interesting games on this console that I just ignored at the time,
Well,
and
you
now
you
they're
want to know
hard to
what
find."
it probably is too is that I think our collectors our age aren't taking into factor as well. Younger generation of collectors getting into system collecting. I mean, it's easy for me and you to be like, oh well, it just didn't sell back then, and people our age are now wanting to get back into it. But it's also like there's another generation behind us that is either just getting started into collecting or have been collecting and now want to, let's say they've been collecting like PlayStation or whatever, now they want to get into GameCube. So those people in the market as well are also driving up, demand.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something that like a lot of people don't really consider, because you see a lot of people. I mean, I see a lot of people online talking about like emulating older systems, and that seems to be um, what's been going on recently. But I do think that younger collectors are really appreciating these systems, and that's why we're seeing like it be
Well,
hard to get this stuff.
it's like the GameCube is at the perfect time in its life cycle. By life cycle, I mean like obviously it's past its actual like Nintendo doesn't support it anymore, but like
Yeah.
the life cycle since it's come out, where generally what happens is that everybody who grew up on the GameCube now has expendable money, now has
Hmm.
disposable income.
Yeah.
And we're getting to like for us, since I think what you're about the same age as me. So we grew up like, N64, that era was like when we first got into gaming. And then obviously we played PS2 and GameCube and Xbox in junior high
Hmm.
and high school.
Hmm.
But like the people that are growing up now experienced like the way we experience N64, they experience GameCube that way. And now they're getting disposable income and now they're getting into the collector's market, like you said. So it's not even necessarily kids that didn't experience it. There are some kids younger than the generation I'm talking about that are trying to collect as well, just because there's interesting stuff on it.
Yeah.
But it's the PS2, Xbox, and GameCube is right now like its collector's market is hitting, and it'll skyrocket and come down a little bit, but it's just what's happening at the
Well,
moment.
well, did you hear during the pandemic, like during the tail end of 2020, and this is like an aside, that like 3DS prices were absolutely insane as well.
I did not know that actually.
3DS systems and games were like spiking as well. It's just, I mean, it's just collecting in general is just getting super expensive. And I've been trying, like I said, like even finding 64 games, I try to get 64 games around $20. I feel like $20 is fair for a 64 game.
I would agree.
But, a lot of the times you see people trying to sell them for like 30 to 40, and it's like you either pull the trigger on the market price or you try to get lucky. You know what I mean?
It's unfortunately we'll get off of this because this is more of a collector's circle now.
Yeah,
But like,
sorry.
no, dude, don't worry about it. I'm a collector too. I know the struggles. I could. You're right though, and it's eventually what's going to happen is that it's unfortunately with the advent of online shopping, it has made the collecting super easy, but because it's made it super easy, it's also made the prices go up a lot more because now the demand is a lot higher and the
Hmm.
supply is lower. So
Hmm.
it sucks. And of course then you deal with fucking bots. When like the 3DS, most likely the reason that started getting scarce is because they were still being able to be found, like leftover new ones before Nintendo discontinued it. You could still find them at the store. So once
Hmm.
it got
Yeah.
discontinued, everyone's like, I need to get my hands on a 3DS, and then they just
Right.
rush for it.
Right.
But anyway, so at the time of the GameCube's launch, we were talking a little bit about how we referenced it before, actually, how Nintendo was kind of out of the three big guys, it was towards the bottom of the in terms of popularity. It was kind of towards the bottom of gamers opinion, not like compared to the PS2. Obviously the PS2 is the best selling console of all time by a
Yeah.
long shot. Like GameCube sold, I looked it up, it sold worldwide approximately 21.75 million. PS2 sold 150 million, so that's less than a third of what the
Yeah.
PS2 sold. I'm trying to see where exactly the original Xbox did. Um, I'm just trying to see if I can even find. Hold on. Xbox barely outsold the GameCube even. The Xbox sold 24 million worldwide. And that's without the Japanese market on top of that. So the
Yeah.
GameCube was the worst selling console of of the big three.
Hmm.
Obviously, there's probably some other ones in there, but the GameCube was one of the worst selling consoles, 21.74 million. And so it was already on the bottom tier. And I don't mean that in terms of quality, I just mean that in public opinion. At the time, it was at the bottom tier of public opinion. And the N64, it also sold worse than the PS1, because you want to know what's like, if you look at like the top 10 of best-selling consoles of all time, PS2 is the top. Then you have the DS and Game Boy / Game Boy Color, and then you have PlayStation 4, and then you have PlayStation. um
Isn't
and
isn't isn't this Switch like
it's
pushing
getting
some of
up.
those rankings?
Yes, in fact, so we went down to one, two, three, four, five. Fifth of all time is the original PlayStation. Wii is sixth of all time, and Switch is seventh.
Okay.
Switch has now outsold the PS3 and the Xbox 360.
Okay.
So it's, yeah, and it's getting up there. So it's, and the thing is, it's still selling. It's not like,
Yeah.
theoretically it could potentially pass the Wii. And on top of that, I have a feeling that this citation, hold on, I'm looking at this on Wikipedia, right?
Right.
Let me see. The citation was from, okay, actually it's from May 6th, 2021. So it's, don't get me wrong, it could go up higher once they release those numbers again. But right now, yeah, it's at 89 million units and over 632 million software units, which is huge, huge.
Yeah.
Like, it's already outsold the 3DS, which is amazing. But anyway,
Yeah.
so at the time, Nintendo was not doing as well. And like I said, the PlayStation, which was fifth all time, and by comparison, the N64 sold 32.93 million units. So unfortunately, what was happening to Nintendo, you had the NES be like the most popular console of its generation in the United States with 61.91 million. Super Nintendo sold 49 million, and then N64 sold 32. So progressively, they had been trending down until the Wii was a runaway success.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
the GameCube was their attempt. I remember hearing that one of the things they were trying to do is they were trying to appeal to the hardcore gamer, to the core gamer audience.
Right.
And which is a good idea in theory, but it ended up not working because Sony and Microsoft were also doing that, and Sony specifically, they just hit it at the right time by adding the DVD player. That's pretty much why the PS2 outsold everything else, arguably. And speaking of the format, though, the GameCube had mini DVDs, which was a
Mhm.
proprietary format created in partnership between Nintendo and, hold on, I wrote it down, between Nintendo and a company called Matsushita Electronics, which owns Panasonic.
Mm.
And they created that, and even their proprietary software, sorry, their proprietary storage hold 1.5 gigs per disc, compared to the PS2's DVDs, which could hold up to 8.5 gigs. So
Mhm.
there's a lot of stuff, unfortunately, working against Nintendo for some reason. Maybe you could speak to this a little bit, man, maybe, or get your thoughts on this.
Yeah.
Nintendo has had, up until recently, Nintendo's had a weird relationship with the way they distribute games, because after the Super Nintendo, everyone went to discs. N64 stayed cartridges. Don't get me
Well,
wrong, I love the N64 and it had its benefits, but you could only store like less than like 50 megs of information on an N64 cartridge, and you could store over 700 on a disc. So they've always had this weird relationship with how they, like, what format their games are shipped on.
yeah, I mean, don't forget Nintendo, especially back then, their number one concern was anti-piracy protection. So that's why they stuck with carts when Sony went to market with the PlayStation. We got to remember that the PlayStation was a partnership deal between Sony and Nintendo. That was
Yeah,
that that
Nintendo
was
created their worst enemy.
yeah, that was I don't know why through all that development they would have allowed Sony to just have basically it's like building tanks and then giving it to your enemy.
Well, and that's why
Um
they backed out of the deal, which pissed Sony off and ultimately pushed them into the game market.
Yeah, I don't know why they made that decision. I mean, I understand, and Nintendo is always like super protective of their IPs, so I understand like the combat of trying to be piracy concern, but ultimately every time they've prioritized that, they've been shooting themselves in the foot. I always thought that the mini discs were kind of cool.
I did too.
With the GameCube, I think that's like what made them made it kind of stand out and be unique. But I get it. Like I understood why other companies didn't want to develop for the Nintendo, because they really would have had to have gimped what they were working on, I feel like.
And Nintendo also at this time was still trying to nurse back the relationships with third party developers, which is why there was that big thing, the Capcom 5,
Hmm.
which was five different Capcom games. I think Resident Evil 4 was one of those five, right?
I believe so, yes.
Which was a huge title. Resident Evil 4 is still considered the best in the series, arguably by a lot of people, at least in the general public. I don't know about fans of the series. I'm not a fan of Resident Evil because I'm a wimp and I'm afraid of stuff. But and I tried playing Resident Evil 4 and I fucking hated it. I hated the controls. I couldn't get into it.
Really?
The tank controls are the worst thing in the world.
Resident Evil 4?
Yeah, I have it for the GameCube, and legit, the first time I tried it, I couldn't kill the first zombie. I could not aim because it was
Oh
so
yeah.
sensitive. And I'm
Yeah.
like, this is bullshit. I don't feel in control. This doesn't make it scary because they move slowly, so I'm just watching my death slowly happen. And I wasn't scared. I was just trying to aim, and I'm like, why can't I hit you? Because I couldn't keep my I hated it so much. I might try it again. Now I don't. Maybe I'll be better at it because it's been a while. But I hated it so much. Doesn't mean the game's bad. It just means I couldn't control it. So that there's a very clear distinction. The game, I don't. I have not played enough of the game to say if it's actually bad or not. Which obviously I'd be wrong because almost everyone loves it.
Yeah, I'm
But
pretty sure it's like
uh,
universally
yeah,
like hailed as like the best game.
oh yeah, no, I'm in the minority with it. I just dislike it because I can't control it. Like nothing wrong with the game. It's just I think it's also, at the time I'm sure it wasn't as big of a deal because people 3D game controls were still getting smoothed out during that time. So now that we're used to, nice fancy, basically, strafe left, move forward, backward, strafe left and right with your left joystick and look around with the right joystick, that wasn't the standard when that game was out. So and even if it was, they might have been trying to do something different. So I'm sure if I played it at the time, I probably would have liked it more. But going back and trying it afterwards, I'm gonna give it another shot though. I have
You
to.
really should. You really should. I mean, I understand like sometimes like controls really make or break uh
Your
if you're going to
experience,
enjoy,
yeah.
yeah, if you're going to enjoy something or not. I would say give it another shot. It's definitely a great game. I mean, it polarized the Resident Evil fans from what I understand, but a lot of people liked the changes that it went to. And honestly, I think that was the first Resident Evil game that I played, was Resident Evil 4.
I really just need to give it a shot because even if I quit because it gets scary, that's at least more forgivable to me than just
Right.
like, and then just quitting because you can't understand the controls. So
Yeah.
I need to give it a shot. But at the time, Nintendo was still trying to nurse its relationship with third party developers because they had killed that relationship over the course of the NES, Super Nintendo, and then the final nail in the well, not final, but the nail in the coffin that really took them a long time to recover. I honestly, up until the Nintendo Switch is when they finally started recovering with their third party
Mhm.
support. But the N64's cartridges just limited developers so much they all jumped ship to the PlayStation because of the more space on the discs and all that good stuff. And that's why Final Fantasy switched from Super Nintendo to PlayStation because they couldn't do enough on the cartridges. So Nintendo was still trying to nurse back those relationships. So that's why they were really heavily courting Capcom. And that's why Resident Evil 4 for the longest time was an exclusive to the GameCube until it wasn't. But for a long while, it was.
Yeah, I think Resident Evil 0 was one of those exclusive deals. So it was that 4. They got all the remasters or re-releases. And then it was, what was that? What was the first one they did? It was like PNO something. Do you remember
Yeah,
that
it
game?
was.
It was
I
weird.
never I mean, I haven't played a whole lot of GameCube games, like I said. The Capcom 5, they were PN03,
Yep.
Beautiful Joe, Dead
Yep.
Phoenix, Resident Evil 4, and Killer
Dead
7.
Phoenix. What the
Yeah,
heck is
I've
Dead? What the
never.
heck is Dead Phoenix? I've never heard of that.
It, Dead Phoenix was go. Oh, I wonder if it never came out because I'm looking at the Wikipedia now. Dead Phoenix was going to be a 3D shoot 'em up featuring a winged man named Phoenix. Based on trailer footage, IGN compared the gameplay to Panzer Dragoon. It was canceled in August of '03 after failing to appear at E3. So it looks
Hmm.
like that was one of the 5 that didn't make it. But Killer 7 is like, didn't they just do a re-release of Killer 7? Or maybe I'm thinking of a different game. But Killer 7, I remember, was super popular. Obviously, Resident Evil 4 was. So obviously, Beautiful Joe is considered one of the best games on the GameCube.
Yeah.
I haven't seen much with Piano 3, though, but at least,
I remember Piano 3 being one of the games that was in like the demo consoles.
mhm.
Um so that's like the only experience I had with the game. I don't know a single person that purchased that game. It was so weird because like you were this android and you would like shoot. It was like a third person shooter. I remember everything being like really uninteresting looking. Like it was really
Mhm.
white. I mean, at least in the demo, there wasn't a lot of like environmental stuff. It was very like sterile and uninteresting to look at.
Mhm.
And like some of the movements of the character, funny enough, kind of remind me of Bayonetta.
And, I mean, who did I feel like the developer, who's the guy that makes Bayonetta? Is it
Well, he used to.
Suda51?
No, he used to work for Capcom. He worked on Okami and he did Wonderful 101. I forget his name. But
That's gonna bother me, yeah.
he's the guy that went and I guess I don't know if he headed Platinum Games, but he worked with Capcom. So I don't know if he worked on that project or not or whatever the
Hideki
situation is.
Kamiya.
Yeah, that's it.
That's who it is. Hideki Kamiya. Yeah, he worked with Capcom on Resident Evil 2, Beautiful Joe,
Mhm.
and you know what? I wonder if, since you said it reminds you of it, I wonder if he worked on Piano 3, because if he worked on Beautiful Joe, it was around the same time.
Yeah.
So that's definitely possible. But yeah, so they were trying to court their third-party developers with the Capcom 5, and I mean, there's a handful of decent third-party titles on the GameCube. Obviously, a lot of them are also games that were on other consoles, like the James Bond games were on GameCube and also on other consoles. Those were really good.
Mhm.
And I mean, I played them on the PS2, but from what I learned from Mike and Neil's, that their GameCube ports were really good. I don't know which system it was for originally, but it still worked really well. Um, but what Nintendo was most known for with the GameCube was its first party software. Metroid Prime, Wind Waker. So it's still kind of unfortunately kept to that idea where Nintendo makes the best games for Nintendo, or makes the only good games, I should say, for Nintendo. And while that isn't necessarily the case, as we discovered through our series of the hidden gems on the Nintendo, on the GameCube, uh, it still unfortunately is, I think, largely the perception of the GameCube, which I think is why it hurt it for such a long time.
Yeah, I think it's weird because I did a video on the Nintendo 64 library before the Nintendo Switch Online expansion pack was announced.
Mm-hmm.
Back when a lot of YouTubers were discussing the rumor of NSO being expanded, and I was like, I, I did this thing where I was like, what I wanted to do in that video is I did a tier list of supposedly every N64 game that was released, and I believe the system had like 300 some games.
Something
And
like that.
out of those 300, I filtered out obviously all the sports games that I didn't play and all the licensed games that I didn't play, and I had left maybe about like around 100 some games to really place in the tiers. So I experienced maybe half of that library, but a majority of the games that were of real quality ended up being Nintendo and obviously Rare at the time. And
Yeah.
I feel like up until recently, you said, it's Nintendo really is towing the line with their consoles. They really can't be. And it's I think it's unique that Nintendo can't be dependent on these other developers, because like you don't ever have to think about Microsoft really being the only company that's developing for their system, or Sony being the only company that's developing for their system. It's uniquely a Nintendo experience that they have to have such a level of quality because they know they can't be dependent on these other third party companies.
It you know what? I never thought about it that way, but I wonder if Nintendo's games have really been able to stay consistently at least good quality. Like obviously there's a bunch of games that are fantastic, like generational experiences, i.e., Mario Odyssey, Breath of the Wild, Wind
Mm-hmm.
Waker.
Mm-hmm.
Hell, I mean, I know the Wii U was a flop, but like Super Mario 3D World was a really fucking good game, like a really, really good game in my opinion. So like it's interesting. I never really thought about it that way, but because Nintendo burned so many bridges during the NES and Super Nintendo era, it almost forced them to get better at game design to keep their consoles afloat. And what really helped them the most was what is it, their handhelds, which we won't go. I mean, we do have to reference the GameCube Advance, the Game Boy Advance, because you could connect it to the
Yeah.
GameCube, which was really cool. But sorry, you were going to say something.
No, I was gonna say, yeah, you're right. With that, and I think that's like when, and this is like a bit of an aside, but like I remember like during those eras, everybody was like, "Oh, Nintendo's dead in the water," because their home market wasn't doing so well. But everybody seemed to forget that Nintendo was supported by two pillars: the home market and the handheld market.
And the DS was going to be the third pillar. That was one of their big advertising things when the DS came out. They had literally, it was called the third pillar. The main pillar, first pillar was home consoles like GameCube. Second pillar is Game Boy, and the third pillar was going to be the DS. But the DS just wiped out the Game Boy line because it was so
Mm-hmm.
obviously it's the second best selling console of all time. Like their handhelds have really kept them afloat during the hard times. Like
Yeah.
the Game Boy and Game Boy Color kept them, like, I mean, they were doing well enough during the N64, but it still gave them the boost they needed. The DS saved them during the GameCube, and then the 3DS held them over until during the Wii U era. So it's like they've always kind of relied on, like you were saying, these different pillars to kind of keep them up. But before we move on, I think it'd be kind of fun just to kind of talk about like when you're playing a GameCube. Let's go from the startup, right? You boot
Yeah.
up. We're gonna uh, pretend here a little bit. We're gonna pop in. Let's say let's Wind Waker. Wind Waker is a
Sure.
great game. We're gonna pop in Wind Waker. But before you do that, though, you have the GameCube startup sound, right? The iconic startup sound.
Mhm.
You may know this, Veach, but maybe some other people don't. If you hold in certain buttons, I believe it's Z upon the startup, then it changes the startup sound. Have you
Mhm.
heard of this before?
Yeah, I've heard it, and I've seen. I For some reason I like to get real nostalgic and just listen to console startup sounds on YouTube, and so I've seen all the different variants of the GameCube startup sound.
Now, did you know that the ambient music on the menu? So, but if you don't have a disc in or you're not loading the disc and you just see
Hmm.
the square menu and you hear ambient noise, if you
Hmm.
speed that up to about 19 times speed, it actually turns into a song, and it's the Famicom Disk System startup music.
Oh, I did not know that. No.
Yes, it is the Famicom Disk System startup music, which I thought was kind of amazing. Like, what a interesting little throwback. And I almost wonder if they included it in there because it was their second ever quote unquote disc based console. Because you had the Famicom Disk System for the Famicom back in like the early mid 80s,
Hmm.
which was an add on to the Famicom or the NES for us in the US. We never got the disc system over in the US, which is kind of awful, which kind of sucks. It was like little floppy disks.
Yeah, yeah. Like I mean, it's when we think of discs. now in the modern era we think of like CDs or DVD discs, but it was legit. Like I had someone in a Nintendo group talk about the Famicom disk system, and I was like, what the heck is this? So I looked it up, and it was literal like floppy
Floppy disk.
disks.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
really cool. And that was where the original Zelda first came on. That was where a lot of I think that's Metroid was originally for that. And the fact that it didn't come over here, like you could save your games on the disk system because it was a writable disk. And they, in order to get around it, because you couldn't, like, imagine Zelda without a save feature, it'd be like
Right.
fucking impossible. So that's how they had to figure out the battery backup to save your game. So if it wasn't for that, you wouldn't have the little save system that we have in like Game Boy cartridges now and all that good stuff. But anyway, so I wonder if that's why they did the Famicom disk system. They played a little homage to it through their ambient menu music.
Oh, for sure. I feel like Nintendo is proud of their history. Um, so they, whether they do it for the fans or they do it for themselves, they're always going to throw those little like hints and nods in there.
No good idea goes to waste is something
Yeah,
that
yeah.
Nintendo really focuses on. Like there's no, and in fact, thinking of that, one of the things I looked up, at one point in time, like before the console was released, they were really heavily considering a motion controller for it. I don't know if it was considered the primary controller like the Wii is, but it was considered, they were really, like, it was far into development, so much so that Factor 5 was experimenting with a motion controller for some of their launch titles. Obviously it ultimately never came to be, but they were experimenting with motion control, so it made it really far into the console's development.
Mhm.
And what do you know? That idea never really went away because you go up to the very next generation and you have motion controls.
Right.
So they really do not throw out any ideas, really. I mean, yeah. Uh, and one of the other thing, just kind of thinking of controllers in general, it took them 3 years. It was this, like, the GameCube controller is one of the most extensively researched for Nintendo. It took them 3 years of development to come up with the way that they wanted the controller to be. And on top of that, there was monthly updates. It's like they were really on top of this, trying to make this controller as good as possible. And as much as I would have liked to see another joystick, like instead of the C stick, they like it's still one of the most comfortable controllers out there. Like, it's like there's a reason why Nintendo is basically forced by the audience to make an adapter to use GameCube controllers on every single one of their consoles.
Yeah, I would agree that I think that the GameCube controller is definitely one of the higher quality controllers uh in video game history, I would say.
I would agree. I wish. I mean, I love how it feels ergonomically. I wish that the button layout was a little bit better. Like, I wish the joysticks were a little bit better. That's pretty much it. But like, one of their design philosophies is they wanted each button to be in a different shape, so that way you could instinctively know which one you were
Mhm.
pressing based off touch. That's why the A button is larger than the B button, and that's why the X and Y buttons, though they are the same shape, they are on different angles.
Mhm.
So it really makes you be able to like, through the texture of the controller itself, be able to tell the difference between the different buttons you're pressing. We're going to talk about the peripherals in a second, but before we move on, I just have a couple more facts that I couldn't find a decent transition into talking about over this. In North America, the GameCube was abbreviated as GCN, but in Japan, it was abbreviated as NGC. And it's weird that the abbreviations for it changed, but it's speculated that, like, one of the reasons that it is that way is because over in North America, GCN stood for NGC stood for the National Geographic Channel, and they use NGC in a lot of their, like, legal filings and stuff like that. It also is some people also speculate that it could have been the Neo Geo Pocket Color, which was NGPC, which is a little close to NGC. Now,
Hmm.
I got a lot of this data, a lot of this info about the development from the Did You Know Gaming videos over on YouTube, so I want to make
Right.
sure I credit them. with the research. But those, I thought that was kind of interesting. Like it's weird because even now I think GCN just sounds nicer than NGC. I don't know. What do you think? I know it's a weird
Um,
question over something so trivial, but
I mean, I would say generally, like, it's I always see it as like the Nintendo GameCube, so NGC kind of makes sense to me. If
NGC
we were
does make more literal sense. For some reason, GCN just looks nicer to me. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me.
like as an
Why I feel
like aesthetically, it makes sense to you.
yeah, aesthetically, but like logically, it makes no sense to why I would like that more.
I
And
gotcha.
the last thing I wanted to bring up was that prior to the GameCube coming out, Microsoft actually offered to buy Nintendo wholesale just for $25 billion. They were
Mm.
going to in the late 90s, early 2000s, they were willing to buy Nintendo for 25 billion. And
Yeah, I'd heard about that.
at first they got laughed out of the room because they thought they were joking. Then apparently Hiroshi Yamauchi, I think I even mentioned it before in a different episode of the podcast, but Hiroshi Yamauchi ended up like taking it somewhat seriously. He took a couple meetings, but he ultimately decided not to. And in all honesty, I know Hiroshi Yamauchi apparently wasn't the greatest or nicest person, but
Was he the one that the quote is attributed to, where he said if Nintendo is no longer in hardware, that then Nintendo is no longer a video game company or something like that? I
I
remember there
don't
being a
know.
quote. I remember there being a quote from one of the heads of Nintendo that just straight up said, like, if we no longer develop hardware, we are no longer a video game company. That was like,
I
and
would try to.
I think that might have been him, because it was like one of the earlier heads of Nintendo of Japan that was a little bit more stubborn and like bold headed in that regard, and was very prideful in the company, which makes sense. I don't think it was an Iwata quote, at all.
No, Iwata, it was just way too nice to to. I
Yeah,
mean, rest in peace. I miss that man. He was.
that's
And
a
it's
whole
it.
nother conversation with
Yeah, it's
the new
but
people in charge.
I mean, I don't know much about what's going on, but yeah, I guess I you know what, that would be an interesting episode to talk to you about because you pay a lot more attention to modern Nintendo than I do. I just like look at the releases and be like, what am I interested in?
Right.
But anyway, yeah, so Microsoft offered to buy them for $25 billion, and obviously we all know how that turned out because they're still separate. So let's move on to the peripherals. Veach, you specifically had wanted to talk. You specifically referenced this off mic. What are some of your favorite peripherals? Or are there any peripherals you want to highlight?
I would say it's interesting how Nintendo like had a trend with it, mostly the I guess it was all three of the systems, like the 64, the Super Nintendo, and the GameCube. They all like had some sort of way of attaching to the handheld counterparts at the time.
Mm-hmm.
My favorite peripheral that I have for the GameCube is the GBA player.
Yes, the
It's it
GBA player is awesome.
it's so nice. It's such a nice attachment because you end up opening up your library on your GameCube to even more games.
I mean, now it's super expensive to get, right? Because you need the attachment itself is generally not that expensive, but the disc that goes along with the player
Yeah,
is
yeah.
very expensive.
When I worked at GameStop, I would see regularly people trading in GameCubes
Hmm.
with the attachment but no disc.
Could you not take it, or would they did
We no
GameStop not care?
we would take it in, but we couldn't, because like to for us to take in a product, it had to be complete as if it were being removed out of the box. So if you didn't have the bottom panel and you had the Game Boy attachment on there, we could only give you the value for what the GameCube was worth complete. So they weren't getting value for the GameCube and the Game Boy
I
attachment. They were just
getcha.
getting one thing because without the Game Boy player attached, we couldn't sell the GameCube because it didn't have the bottom panel.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't even think
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. And then
That
I don't know. I mean, we weren't supposed to take the Game Boy player without the disc, but I'm sure there were some people who took it in without even thinking about it.
That's nuts. That's so nuts to think about. But yeah, no, you're right, dude. Because they Nintendo has done this thing where they mix with the handhelds a lot. I can think of on the N64, at least in the US, they had the little controller pack that you could use to interact with. It only worked with the Pokemon games and Pokemon
Mhm,
Stadium, which I
mhm.
had, and I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. So they only that only it only worked there. In Japan, they did have an add-on, like a base, kind of like what they did with the Super Game Boy for the Super Nintendo, where you could pop in the Super Game Boy
Yeah.
cartridge and then pop in the Game Boy cartridge to
Yep.
that. They had something like that, but that never came to the US. But what's interesting about the GameCube is that unlike its predecessors, it is the first console to offer more interactivity with its handheld counterpart, excuse me.
Mhm.
Because besides the Game Boy Player, which you could use then to to play Game Boy Advance games, and I believe original Game Boy games as well on the GameCube. It also had You could also use those to interact with specific things in the games, like the Tingle Tuner in Wind Waker,
Yes.
or the Legend of Zelda Four Swords Adventures, stuff like that. There's a lot of interactivity
Crystal
that was
Chronicles.
offered. Crystal Chronicles, that's a huge one. I remember, uh, I was always confused by that game, and I think because my friend had it, actually Tristan had it. I mentioned him at the beginning of the episode, and we didn't understand what was going on because it just kept repeating over and over and over again. Like, you play
Yeah.
through the same storyline, or like, does something happen by like the fifth year? Like, what are we doing? Like,
Yeah, you had to like oh god, it's been forever. It's been forever since I played it, but I loved Crystal Chronicles. You had to like do certain you had to like beat certain dungeons in a certain way to like manipulate the fog. So like depending on how the fog laid during that year is how you progressed or something like that. It's been a while, but I remember it being something like that. You had to be paying attention to like how which dungeons you were going towards.
I think what made the game more fun though was the multiplayer aspect of it, though, right? So I wonder if we just completely missed out on the fun aspect of it because we weren't playing multiplayer. It was
Oh
just
no.
single
I
player.
I have no idea. I played it by myself too and I absolutely love the game.
Oh, okay. Then,
Yeah.
I mean, it's been years, so I have not played it myself, like, in probably over a decade, and now who knows how expensive it is. It's a Final Fantasy game for GameCube, so who
Yeah.
knows what the price of that thing is now. I always thought, what was cool about, one of my favorite, hold on, what was I had a peripheral, now I'm blanking on it, hold on.
Was it the
Oh, I
GB
had
like not the GBA but the not the player but the link cable?
no, because that we kinda reference that with the connecting for Fantasy
Oh yeah.
Star. I remember what it is now, though. One of the coolest attachments to me was the network adapter that you could buy for it. And even though I didn't have it as a kid, I actually had a friend, because I didn't even have a GameCube as a kid. I had a friend who had it, and they played Fantasy Star Online. And there was
Yeah.
actually only 3 games on the entire console in the US, at least. There was 5 total in Japan, but only 3 in the US that could use the online functionality of the GameCube, which once again was an adapter. And it was all 3 were different Fantasy Star games from Sega, so that's pretty much all there was. And one thing I found interesting that I found on that Did You Know Gaming video was that there was an exploit that hackers could use to basically bring in, like, pirate games onto their GameCube. Like, they could essentially send ROMs over to their GameCube through by hacking Fantasy Star. They could use the Ethernet port that for Fantasy Star Online and then bring data onto the GameCube. I don't know exactly what they used it
Oh,
for. I'm assuming some form of piracy.
right.
Sega ended up patching it, but obviously this was before you could just patch a game. There was no internal, it's not like it is now. So they just re-released another version of the game, and it was called Fantasy Star 1 and 2 Plus. But that technically never fixes the issue, because unless you get rid of the disc,
Right.
you're still going to be able to do it. But Fantasy Star actually lasted, like, the online service lasted up until 2007 for Fantasy Star, I want to say. You could also play, I think you mentioned this a little bit before. You were talking about the link cable, off mic, at a part I edited out, but were you thinking of the link cable to the Game Boy Advance, or the link cable to other GameCubes and to create like a LAN party?
No, the link cable. I don't think the link cable would allow you to land. It was for basically like playing Four Swords Adventure. So it was like Game Boy Advance to GameCube.
Yeah,
Um,
okay, yeah.
yeah, I remember. So I didn't get a link cable until I was uh, much older. I would say not like a few years ago. Actually, is is when I actually got my hands on a link cable. And for the first time, I was able to play Animal Crossing and go to that little island that you get for connecting your Game Boy Advance to your
I've
Animal
never
Crossing
played
game.
the original Animal Crossing.
Oh man, it's
I mean,
great.
isn't Animal Crossing expensive now too, like the original one?
I have no idea. I haven't looked up the price because I own it. So I mean, I could see real
No,
quick.
I'll look it up. I'll look it up real quick. No, what I was referencing before though was you could actually have like LAN parties with this. You could connect multiple GameCubes, usually for racing games like 1080 Avalanche or Kirby's Air Ride or Mario Kart Double Dash.
Okay.
Um, Apparently, you can. From what I'm reading, it can force an online connection with third-party PC software, but
Hmm.
that's probably janky as all hell. But yeah. So you could play. Apparently, there's a decent amount on some of these. Like you could have. I want to say I remember reading like you could have up to 16 players on Kirby's Air Ride or something with multiplayer. I don't know if that's true or not.
That's
I'd have
that.
to double check. That would be insane though if it's 16.
I mean, that's wild. I can't imagine. I can't even imagine like a modern game having you play up to 16 players.
So Animal Crossing isn't outrageous. It's $50 complete. So that's still like
Yeah, that's still
that's still a little pricey for a retro game, but it's still not like the worst.
yeah.
New it's $464.
Yeah, but why you realistically you have no I mean, I don't know. I
I
try
never
not to
bu-
buy
I don't buy sealed. Fuck that.
yeah, only sometimes if it's decent, but let's not get into another collecting
I know, right?
loop.
Are there any other peripherals you want to talk about though?
I mean, like what else was there? There was the Game Boy player.
I
I never had like the bongos or the mic
Oh
that
my
people
god, I actually have. I can show you once we finish recording on the camera. I actually have a box. I have the bongos in the box.
really.
Yeah, I have Donkey Konga with the bongos in the box. I got it for like $25 a couple of years ago.
I never liked Donkey Konga, but Donkey Kong, what was it, Jungle
Jungle
Beat?
Beat?
The actual like
Yeah.
adventure game, right?
Yes. Well, so Donkey Konga is the adventure game. Donkey Kong Jungle Beat
Oh, okay, never mind then. Other way around.
is, I believe that's the rhythm game.
Yeah, so the one that was the adventure is the one
Oh,
was
sorry, you're
that I
right.
enjoyed.
Donkey Kong Jungle Beat is the adventure one. Donkey Konga, I'm assuming, is the music game. Sorry, I keep interrupting you, but I just wanted to make sure I got the right game.
No, it's
You
all
were right
right.
the first time.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so the adventure game was fun. I don't know, like I feel like every when I had the opportunity to buy these games, I kept like just being like, I'm not really interested in this. And now that I don't have them, I'm like, fuck, I should have bought these games. I don't know why I didn't.
It's one
Like
of
an
those things. It's like
like an
you
idiot.
don't. Well, it's like you're like me. You're a collector on a budget, so you have to be very selective with what you want to buy. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, with that in mind, you a lot of times will bite yourself in the ass because like years later, be like, oh man, I was always considering getting that. I'd always
Yeah.
just assumed I'd get it later. And then when later finally comes, it's like, fuck, it's like $80 now.
Yeah, it's like
I
super
guess
expensive.
so.
Com-
It's just kind of like it shit happens. It sucks, but that's yeah,
Yeah.
no fun. One other peripheral that I thought was kind of interesting was the keyboard because it's one of the goofiest looking things I've ever seen. Where it's one half, like on one side of the keyboard is half of the GameCube controller, and the other, it's almost like they took a GameCube controller, stretched it out, and then put a keyboard in the center of it. So it still has the GameCube controller like handles on the left and right side of it, but it's as wide as a keyboard. And it's like, I get it's meant to be put on your lap while you're playing, but just out of context, it looks really fucking ridiculous.
It is interesting that they tried to incorporate it as like an actual like functioning controller instead of making it as like something that you just plug into like port 2 or 3 and then
Right?
like would use like as needed. I feel like I've never seen one in the wild, but I have seen like certain YouTubers like showcase it.
I'm sure it's hard to find too, but yeah, that's an interesting one.
Yeah, something that I wish I had picked up when I had the opportunity to, specifically for Animal Crossing on the GameCube, was the e-reader,
Hmm.
because I'm really into collecting the Animal Crossing amiibo cards, and I keep seeing in like the groups that I'm in people showing off like their complete collections of these old Animal Crossing cards, and I'm just like, oh, I wish I was smart enough to have purchased these back then.
For those who don't know, the e-reader was an add-on to the Game Boy Advance, which it's a little interesting. I've always had a weird ethical like dilemma with this because I don't know how exactly the game, like, I don't think there's actually data on the cards. I think it just reads data and then it unlocks stuff within the existing cartridge, or maybe it tells, I don't know exactly how it works, but essentially you swipe these cards through an e-reader almost like a credit card, but it's like thinner than a credit card, and it will actually add gameplay to your games on the Game Boy Advance. And obviously, since there's Animal Crossing ones, to Animal Crossing on the GameCube. Do you know what it did for the GameCube games? Like what it did for Animal
Um,
Crossing?
I think it gave you items,
I'll look
um,
that up if you if
and something like that, because it was like, you could play and unlock NES games in Animal Crossing, but I think certain NES games were tied to these e-reader cards, and like certain patterns and villagers would have like certain items and stuff like that, I believe.
yeah, you're right. They grant items such as mini games and items.
Now, what I'm confused is like I never owned one, so I don't know exactly how it functioned. But like the card itself, the e-reader device like went into the GBA slot. So when you swiped a card, I know there was like standalone e-reader cards that were like little mini games, but I think it was just like a demo, like a abridged version of the game that you would play with that plugged in. Like, did you have to remove it and then plug in another cartridge or something like that?
I
Is that
don't know actually. I can maybe look up a picture. But that is a good question because this isn't like, so like back on the PlayStation 1, this ties in with this, I promise. Back on the PlayStation 1, you could swap out your disc with something else and the game would still work, because the way the PlayStation worked is that it would load all of the information and put it into like basically the RAM
right?
and for memory data. So you could actually pop open the thing and take the disc out and close it, and the game would still play up until a point where it needed to load more information from the disc.
Okay.
So if it needed to constantly load information from the disk, then that wouldn't work. But what you could do sometimes on certain games, you could take the PlayStation disc out, put in like a music disc, and since the game is programmed to read music from certain locations on the disc, you could actually like, so say you're like, I don't know if this worked with Spyro, but let's just use Spyro as an example. During the
Mhm.
music in the background or something, when it's ready to loop, it says, all right, go to this specific point on the
Mm.
Spyro the Dragon disc. But if you swap it out for, say, like, I don't know, a Britney Spears CD, it could start up in the middle of a song because that's where the laser moved there, thinking the song is located there on the disc. But that's actually, like 2 minutes into like Hit Me Baby or something like that.
Oh, huh.
So you could actually do weird stuff like that. So the reason I say that though is because Game Boy Advance cartridges are essentially flash memory. So once you remove it from the system, there's no power
Yeah.
going to it anymore. So how does it really remember? So that's why I'm kind of confused, like, because you can't like hot swap it. I don't think.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I don't think I'm not, like I said, I didn't own it, So I'm not 100% sure, but I'm fairly certain that the cards themselves just were read through the e-reader and played through that. And I think it's like once you turn the system off, or like once you pulled it out, like it you couldn't do it anymore. Because with the going back to Animal Crossing and like the island that you could get if you use the link cable.
Mm-hmm.
So you would have to turn the GBA on in a very specific time when the game was booting to be able to access Captain, who then took you over to the island in the game. And then once you were done in the game, like on that island, you would disconnect the cable, and then you had like a little mini game on your SP or GBA that you could play, but it was only good until you turn. I mean, I guess the Game Boy had to hold some sort of memory because you were able to remove the link cable and still play this game, but if you turned it off, it was gone.
Hmm. I'm trying to look up a video of it, but I think from what I can see, the way a lot of it would work is that you would the way it would work is that you would swipe all 5 cards at the same time, or however many cards are in the pack that's required,
Mm.
and then it seems like it would store whatever data the cards had, which essentially is just like it reads like the ones and zeros on the card, and then you're
Yeah.
essentially programming the e-reader to perform whatever little mini game there is with it. But I
Mhm.
can't. But it famously would add like hidden levels in like Super Mario Bros. Advance and stuff like that. There was hidden additional levels that were technically in the game, but the cards just unlocked it or something like that.
Hmm.
So I'm a little confused with how it, like you said, how exactly works. I'm going to keep watching, and if we see it, then we'll go from there. But is there any other peripherals you want to talk about besides what we've mentioned so far?
No, I think that's it. Like that was like definitely one of the ones that always like really interest me that I was never able to get my hands on.
Okay. Looking at right now, I think he's setting it up in the video that I'm finding. It seems like you needed the Game Boy to do it. You needed the GameCube in order to do it. So let's move on. I'm gonna keep on watching and see if I can find it. I'm like going 10 seconds at a time trying to see like how do you work? Well, you know what, listeners, if you know how the e-reader works, instead of waiting for me to watch like a fucking 15-minute video while also recording a podcast,
Yeah.
write in to tell me. So let's move on to memories. Let's move on to kind of we're getting ready to close out this episode. We've been doing a pretty good extensive deep dive into the GameCube, in my opinion. But Veach, what are some of your favorite memories or earliest memories, any and all memories of the GameCube?
Well, I told you the first game that I had was Spider-Man. That was like obviously like the first like experience with the system. Some of the my favorite memories with the system. I remember when Beautiful Joe was coming out, and I think I was at like a KB Toys, and they had it was either KB Toys or it was like a GameStop in the mall, and
Okay.
they had the demo display up, and they had Beautiful Joe in there, and I played it for the first time, and I was absolutely obsessed with the game. I played it. I would play it, and then I like kept thinking about it, and I just like kept going back. Like every so often, I would ask my mom if we could go to the mall just so I could go back to the go back to that GameStop and play the
Yeah.
demo over and over again. It was such a fun game. Um, that always like sticks out to me in my head was just like playing Beautiful Joe for the first time, and probably Wind Waker. Like Wind Waker is like I played the crap out of Wind Waker. I think I beat it like 3 or 4 times,
Wow,
and
that's a fairly long game, especially the GameCube version. That's a long game.
yeah, and I would like try to do everything in that game too. I tried to like you know how like you could like trade with the Gorons at one point when you go to Windfall Island,
Yeah.
and to get like the vendor to give you the sale, you have to like plant like those things around the island. Like there
Mm-hmm.
were like little things, and there was like that whole like trading side mission to do, and I would go back and forth from the Gorons and try to unlock all like the little trade items that you could get. I really tried to 100% it. And what's weird is I have this like memory, and I have this memory of, you know how like you got when you got the hook on the King of Red Lions, and you would like fish up treasure,
Mm-hmm.
like that you would fish up like a chest or whatever, or
Yeah, yeah.
the pieces of the Triforce. I specifically remember fishing up this like item that looked like one of the squids. Like, do you remember how like the Krakens had like all those eyes
Yeah,
all
yeah,
over them?
yeah. One of those, one of the giant squids that are in the game.
Yeah, it looked like you. It looked like I fished up a jug that had all those eyes on it, and it was colored the same. And it spawned a Kraken when you fished it up. But I swear to God, I remember doing this, and I've looked at strategy guides, and I've looked at like other playthroughs, and I've never seen anybody else do it. I've never seen anything documented about it. And I know it happened, and I've never been able to do it again, but I remember it happening.
Maybe you should put it out online. Like, I mean, obviously now that people can hear it on here, maybe someone has done it, but like, like put it, like spread it out. Just be like, does anyone else remember this happening? Because was it like, is it just the fever dream of a child like just loving video games, or was it
Yeah, I
did it
don't
actually happen
know.
type of
I don't
thing?
know what it was. Like it's like one of those like weird things. What do they call it? What is it? The Mandala effect?
Mandela effect, yeah.
Mandela effect, yes. So like I'm worried it's one of those situations where like I have this alternate reality in my head that
Well,
didn't
I mean,
really
to be
exist.
fair, it wouldn't be Mandela effect is when a lot of people
Yeah, that's true.
experience the same. So, like, the Berenstein Bears is actually like everyone misspells Berenstein Bears. It's like it's actually spelled
Berenstein or whatever.
Berenstain or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, that's funny though. That's really funny.
I swear to God, I remember seeing it. I remember it happening, and I've been trying to find evidence of it ever since, and I just can't. I can't find it. It makes me sad.
Maybe you'll find it someday. Who knows? You never know. For
Yeah.
me, I remember. So my friend Tristan, who's been on the podcast a bunch of times, he had a GameCube, and I
Mhm.
remember I was one of those snot nosed kids who was like, my video games are always better. And even though I never came out and said it that bluntly, in my mind, that's how I felt. I remember my one of my childhood friends, and I feel like such an asshole now. He knew I loved Zelda. Like I was obsessed with Ocarina of Time on the N64,
Yeah.
and he had Link's Awakening for the Game Boy. And when I saw it, I'm like, that's not 3D. That's a stupid Zelda. Like, what kind of that's not Zelda? Who like I had no idea. I
Right.
didn't understand. And he loved that game. And I just was like, I had so little interest in it.
Mhm.
I had none because it wasn't 3D. It wasn't in color. It was all, and I kind of had a similar reaction to the GameCube because the GameCube didn't have like the controller was a little bit different than what I was used to with the PS2. It didn't have what was I obsessed with? Like Medal of Honor. Actually, no, they did have Medal of Honor for the GameCube
Yeah,
now
they
that I
did.
think about
Mhm.
it.
Mhm.
But it didn't have like Ratchet and Clank and Jack and Daxter, and it didn't have all these other ones. But um it took me a while to warm up to it, especially like everyone loved Smash Brothers. I hated Smash Brothers when I first played it because
Really?
I couldn't like even if it was just one on one, I would lose track of my guy so easily. And it was weird because I had played Smash Brothers for the N64 and loved it. And now that I look back, I understand why it was such a harder adjustment for Melee compared to the original. The original is slow. It's
Mhm.
very
Very very
slow.
slow. Mhm.
And Melee is still arguably the fastest. I don't know how much Ultimate is because I've barely touched Ultimate, but like Melee was the fastest for the longest time. Maybe still is. I don't know. Maybe you know more than I do with that. But um,
I would say Melee is probably the faster. I mean, Ultimate still kind of plays like Smash 4. So,
okay.
yeah.
And I barely touched Smash 4. The Smash games are just not my cup of tea. I don't like I don't think they're bad. I get bored with them. I get bored with fighting games.
Understandable.
It's just not something I find that fun. Even if I'll play it and be like, yeah, this is really well made and this is really well designed. But when I first played Smash, I hated it just because I couldn't find where the guy was. I couldn't see. And that's not a fault of the game. It was just it took me a long time, and then I ended up falling in love with it. I loved Smash after a little while. I even played it. I remember it was when I started going to college. It was at the tail end of GameCubes being popular on college campuses, but it
Okay.
was still on mine. At the I went to a local college, and they had a game room there, and they would what is it? And they would actually kids would bring in game cubes, and literally all day long you could just go and play against people. Like there's some kids who ended up going professional there. I actually have a friend who's been on the podcast before that is now like in the top two, like he's one of the top players in Soul Calibur.
Okay.
So it was a place where a lot of people honed their fighting game chops. I never enjoyed fighting games just because it's just not my cup of tea, but it was really cool to experience. So I got obsessed with Melee from that. But also, like, back to Tristan, that's where I first played Melee. It's also where I first played Wind Waker, and I was also one of those skeptics about like the graphics. It's not realistic. It's so cartoonish. But I loved Wind Waker the moment I played it. Like, I was obsessed with it. It was
I
such a
think
good game.
I think Nintendo really did a great job at like pushing the system to do what they wanted to do with it, like as far as like effects and visuals. Um especially like with something like especially with something like Mario Sunshine, the water, I remember the way the water looked in that game is still hands down some of the best water I've
Dude,
ever
yes,
besides
100%.
besides Sea of Thieves, which has like phenomenal water effects. Super Mario
But that's
Sunshine, yeah, I mean that's like current generation on
but I
PC.
was just also going to say that's funny because Sea of Thieves is made by Rare, which was
Yeah.
big on the N64, so it kind of ties back to Nintendo,
Yeah,
just a little
yeah.
bit.
But I remember like that's like another memory that I had was just like playing that game and looking at the water. And just like I would do that like just like randomly throughout the game. I would just look at the water. I'd be like, this is amazing. I can't believe that this is like a thing.
Dude, Mario Sunshine's water still looks amazing. Like, it still looks really good. I'm obviously newer graphics water looks quote unquote better, but I just
Yeah.
think it like you look at any other version of water on that generation, it just doesn't even come close in my opinion. I
No.
agree with you 100%.
y-
I remember I didn't play Sunshine till years later. Like, I'm talking like late PS3, early PS4, somewhere around that. Like, 2010s, early 2010s. And I remember seeing it. I'm like, wow, that looks really good. I think one of the things that GameCube does really well, especially the Nintendo first party titles, is that the art direction for them holds up very well. Very,
Yeah.
very well. Like, you look back at, like, I love the Medal of Honor games. Medal of Honor Frontline is very rough looking. It's very, very rough looking. And like, even look back on the N64, I love Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, the quote unquote more realistic looking Zeldas.
Mhm.
They don't look that good by comparison now. You look at Wind Waker, it still looks pretty fucking good. It still looks really, because it's a cartoon and it's more timeless.
Yeah, stylized graphics definitely allow you to definitely allow games to kind of like fare better in longevity with like the way that they look. I want like when you're trying to when you're trying to reach like realistic graphics, especially back then, it's not gonna look great.
It doesn't. I mean, it probably looked fine at the time, but like
Yeah, like
it.
compare. Yeah,
But comparatively, yeah, it's just nowhere near what it should. It's just nowhere near what it is now. Obviously,
yeah.
it doesn't work.
Something real quick, something I wanted to mention about because you were talking about fighting games.
Yeah.
Something that like I really got into during that era is I had a friend that was really into Melee,
Okay.
and he would take me and another friend of mine to tournaments with him, and like we all tried to be part of that tournament scene in the area. And I remember the first tournament I ever got into in Melee. I don't know if you follow the Smash tournament scene or know some of the names, like some of the big names in the
Not
scene.
really.
Uh,
I don't know. I don't follow a lot of that stuff.
so back then, like this was in high school, when we were getting into Smash, and we went to a tournament somewhere in the area, somewhere in our area, and everybody was making a big deal about it because there was a player that was going to show up that was really good, and he was really good, but no one liked him. Like no one liked him because he was weird, and his name was Mewtwo King. If that name
Okay.
is familiar, Mewtwo King is like a
I mean,
big
I'm not familiar with him. I'm
player.
sure any Smash competitive fans are very familiar with him.
So, like my friend who was really, really into the Smash scene, he was like, "Oh yeah, Mewtwo King's gonna be there. He's really good. Like this guy's like next level." And he was he was like the person that figured out like frame data and all this like stuff in regards to like
Like
how
fucking
Smash.
Yoshi's shield is 1 pixel larger than everybody else's. That's actually true, by the way. Yoshi's shield is 1 pixel larger than every other character's.
Well, he was like that guy, like, and back then like everybody thought he was so annoying because like he was a little awkward to talk to. And but anyway, so when I like literally my first match at my first tournament, I get matched up against Mewtwo King, and he just dominates me,
Yeah.
just completely dominates me. And I was like, oh well, this is great. This was a fun time. But it was a fun little experience because I met up with him again. We met up with him again, I want to say like a year or two later, and we all went to Philadelphia to go to what was it? What was the tournament? MLG, Major League Gaming. There
Hmm.
was a big Smash tournament then, and we gave him a ride because I think he was like from New Jersey or something like that.
Interesting.
Yeah, so like he got a ride from like my friend, and I didn't play him in that tournament. I got knocked out early, but like he did all right. But I just thought it was funny, like the Smash tournament back then. Like I made some like good memories with my friends just because like we were all really enjoyed Smash.
I feel like that's one of the most it's something Nintendo really does well with all their consoles, even their flops, is that they really prioritize the social experience with their games. And I mean,
Mm,
obviously NES and Super Nintendo not quite as much because it was still getting their footings, but like N64 and on, and don't get
mm,
me wrong, they still had a lot of social experiences on those older consoles, but like the game industry was still in its infancy for the most part in the US. But like N64 and on, you had 4 controller ports. Almost all of their consoles allow four controllers natively. Like you don't need to buy an adapter to play 4 controller to get 4 people to play on the same console. It's
mm.
built into the functionality from the N64 on. And I really feel like that goes into like the design of their games really kind of reflects that mentality. Smash Brothers, obviously. Look at all the interactivity between, Zelda Four Swords Adventure and then Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles and then even Fantasy Star Online, even though the online servers were a little bit meh, but
Yeah.
it's still something that they've really have striven for. Um, it's funny. So my friend Jay, who he's the guy that was on before, who's like top 5 in Soul Calibur,
Mm,
um, or in one of the top players. He told me a story because he used to be in the competitive Smash scene for Melee, I think, and
mm,
he was at a tournament. He might have told this story before on the podcast, but it's been like 4 or 5 years since he told it. Maybe there's a player who was playing and he
mm,
lost. This player lost. I don't know. I don't think Jay was up there at the time, but he
mm.
lost, and he he just unplugs his controller silently, wraps it up, and then picks it up and smashes it into the ground, just shattering the controller everywhere. Like
Yeah.
he was just so reserved. Like he wasn't cursing out his opponent. He wasn't doing anything else. He just kind of quietly, almost very mild manneredly wraps up his controller. Then all of a sudden, just rage destroys his controller into the ground. Oh my god! I just the visual in my head. I didn't see it, but the visual in my head is probably better than anything that actually happened.
Yeah, I mean that was very common back in the day. Like people would just rage out and just like destroy controllers. Not it was it was very funny to be a observer of that.
Probably not at fun because it's one of I've heard stories now the Smash community is pretty toxic. I don't know if that's true or not, but I feel
Yeah,
like
I
most
wouldn't know.
online I feel like most online scenes are unfortunately very toxic.
Mhm.
Anyway, one of my final memories that I'll say is I mentioned it before, but one of the first memories I had with the thing that really kind of sold me on the GameCube wasn't even a GameCube exclusive. It was a game called Metal Arms Glitch in the System.
Mm,
And I think when you were on for the GameCube Hidden Gems, I mentioned it. I did a full
you did.
episode on it years ago. It's interestingly enough, it is my most downloaded episode, and not a lot of people know about the game. So I'm always surprised. I don't know if it's a bot that's just downloading these, but it's my most popular episode for some reason. And I'm not complaining. It's cool, but it's just interesting.
That's
Anyway,
that's that's definitely been a game that's on my list to pick up eventually.
it's a very good game. It's a really good third person shooter, but my friend Tristan had it, and he had it because at the time we were both in like junior high. So his parents, you're still at that age where your parents really do control what you can and can't watch and play. So they never let him play any games that involved you killing humans. You could
Okay.
not have any violence towards humans. But in this one, you could have it was all violence. Since it was all robots, it was totally fine, even though there was swearing, there was you could dismember robots and have them run around like
Right.
you could shoot off everything but except from the torso up, so there's just this pair of legs running around, and sometimes they would even kick you. Like it's a really funny game.
Yeah.
So I just have memories going over to his house, watching him play and taking turns going through the missions. It was a lot of fun. Do you have any memories before we go on to the listener memory section?
Um, Beyond what I've said, I'm trying to think if there was like anything wild. Yeah, I have a memory. I have a memory of this is like more of like just like an experience I had with a friend at the time. So my one friend, my best friend, that one of my best friends back in high school, we would go to his house pretty regularly after school, and we would play. We would play like just like different games, and there was like a time where we were playing like nothing but Mario Strikers. It was either yeah, it was Mario Strikers, and I never owned Mario Strikers, so I
I've
would
heard
only.
that's a great game.
It's great. I have it now, but he owned it and I didn't, and so he was way more experienced than I was, and so he would kick my ass every time we played it.
Yeah.
Every time we played it, he kicked my ass. And there was one time we were playing, and I was just doing so well. I was up by like 3 or 4 points, and like the game was about to end, and then his mom goes, "Oh, do you guys want dinner? Dinner's ready." And he just yells, "Yup," and then turns the GameCube off. And
Oh.
I go, and I go, what the fuck? I was gonna win. And he's like, "Ooh, I guess we'll never know."
Son of a bitch.
I was so mad, but it was like so funny. It was like so funny, but I was also so mad about the situation too. Like I wasn't like legitimately angry at him, but I was just like, of course I was about to win. And then like for like a good like week, he just kept saying, "Ooh, I'm undefeated in Mario Strikers," right?
I you have a lot thicker skin than I did at that age, dude. I was such I mean, I still am. I can be a sensitive person at times now, even, but like I was such a baby back in like six and seven. Like, I guess I don't know what grade you were in, but like even like elementary school, if a friend did that to me, I don't think I would talk to them for like a week. I would be so
Nah,
mad.
no, we were like in high school when that happened,
Okay,
so
I would have been able to handle that.
it was just like it was so funny because I was like so hyped up. I was like, I'm finally gonna beat him, and then just like the timing of that of his mom just being like, "Oh, do you guys want
You
to?
want
Do you guys
dinner?
want dinner?" He's just like, "Yep," and then
Oh,
just turned it off.
what a dick move. What a dick move. All right, so let's go to the listeners here. So we're going to start off with Twitter, and then we're going to go to Instagram.
Yeah.
On Twitter, my friends of the show, Mikes and Beers, they're a podcast. Mikes and Beers love that Mario Kart Double Dash had two characters, or they love that Mario Kart Double Dash had two characters, something the series shouldn't have abandoned. What are your thoughts on that? Do you miss the two characters?
Um, I don't know. I mean, I actually was playing Double Dash recently, and it's definitely like it makes it unique, but I mean, the only real benefit was like the characters. You would have two different types of specials with your characters when you would run over an item box. So depending on like your your team makeup, you could have really powerful specials, and then you could hold two items at a time. I don't know if, I mean, since then they've incorporated, double item boxes, and you can hold double item, like more than one item. So I don't know if it's necessarily necessary to bring two characters back. I don't know. Like I mean, I'm kind of like indifferent to it. I thought it was cool for what it was, but I don't know. I wouldn't say that it's gonna make or break me picking up another Mario Kart game. You know what I mean?
I getcha. Well, I'm of the opinion that it should come back just so you can annoy the shit out of your friends because there is nothing more satisfying than getting Daisy on your team. And every time you switch her out, she goes, "Hi, I'm Daisy. Hi, I'm Daisy. Hi, I'm Daisy." Just over and over and over again. Um, my buddy Phantom Ferric, Twitch streamer Phantom Ferric says melee tourneys, and to reference back to what we said before, and the massive amount of broken controllers.
Yeah, melee tournaments were a lot of fun. The tournament scene was definitely a lot of fun back then with what I experienced. I mean, I was never good at it. I was never good at tournaments,
But
but
you still had fun.
yeah, I did. It was you met a lot of really interesting people in the tournament scene, and I think it exposed you to a lot of different
People.
yeah, to a lot of different people and just to different, ideas, and it was like fun like having rivalries with other people too.
I feel like that's it's one of the aspects of being a gamer that I mean, the perception's pretty much all gone, but there's still some lingering bit of it from especially the older generation or the people just not in pop culture, like who don't pay attention to the media at all now.
Mhm.
But it's like that idea that like the gamer is just the person who sits by themselves and lives at their parents' house in a basement by themselves in a dark room playing video games and shit like that.
Right.
Um, so yeah, so it's they it that perception's pretty much gone, and I feel like this generation is really what kind of started to turn that around. I mean, it was always pretty much like not that real because you would always talk about games to your friends at school, but
Mhm.
yeah. The Gaming Together podcast writes in being told not to play the Resident Evil remake, not listening, waiting until nightfall, and then stealing the game out of their parents' liquor cabinet. Got to the iconic scene where you walk up to the first zombie, screamed, and took the game out and put it back.
I
Oh,
never
that's
had.
great.
I guess like their parents. It was their parents' game, maybe that they bought for themselves,
I
and they didn't
don't
want the kids
know,
to play.
maybe? It's possible. I remember I have a memory. It's not GameCube related, but just speaking of like parents and older people with games because back when we were kids, it wasn't uncommon for parents to have games, but it also wasn't common. It wasn't
Right.
like it is now where parents who are like kids who grew up being gamers now are parents type of thing,
Yeah.
i.e. me. Um but I remember that I remember it was at a family party and my uncle was always the one that had like the better technology who'd always like kind of stay up to date for a little while.
Mm.
And so I'm pretty sure he had a Leisure Suit Larry game on a PC. I don't know for sure, but it was something like that where I walked upstairs and my dad's like, "You can't look at this." Maybe it was like Duke Nukem or something. I have a
I mean, it
vague
could have
memory of
been.
hearing like I maybe heard like "Shake It, Baby" or something like that, but
Yeah, yeah. I
I don't know.
remember. Yeah, well, I mean, especially Duke Nukem on the PC. That I mean, that had some pretty mature content on there.
I
I
mean,
had
all of
Duke.
them did.
I had Duke Nukem on the 64, and I think that was the only game that my parents didn't like that I played. I don't. Well, I mean, my
Okay.
dad didn't. My dad didn't like that I played video games in general, but I mean, like as far as like the content of it, I think Duke Nukem for the 64 was the one that like they weren't too happy with because of how graphic it was.
I mean, all of the Duke Nukem is like just not a good role model for anybody. Actually,
Right,
it doesn't matter
right.
who it is. I mean, I think that's the joke of it. Um, Last one from Twitter. My friends over at the JK Games podcast playing Super Mario Strikers with my brother, one of my favorite games of all time, and that's Kayla from the JK Games podcast. I mean, at least she sounds like she had a better time than you with your friend
Yeah.
turning off the console. Now we're over to Instagram. We got a couple here. The first one is from the Midwest Meltdown, the podcast, the Midwest Meltdown. The first time they played the Simpsons Hit and Run game. It's such an underrated gem.
I've heard a
I
lot
don't
of
know.
people talk about this game.
Yes, I mean it's pretty much like a Crazy Taxi clone, but obviously Simpsonized, and
I
I'm
thought it
sure
was
I'm sure it's different. Maybe it's more GTA esque.
yeah, I heard it was more GTA like.
I always thought it was like I mean, technically, Crazy Taxi is an open world game, but
Yeah, but yeah, no, with this one, I believe like you could get out and just take any car in the world. So I think that's like what made it different because Crazy Taxi, you were kind of like, you know, stuck to one vehicle.
okay,
Yeah,
yeah, I'll have to give it a shot. I've never played it either, so I'll have to give it a shot.
yeah, I definitely want to try it. It's another game that I gotta eventually pick up.
From my friend over on Instagram, British Bond Addict, Star Fox Assault, criminally underrated. Did you ever play that game? I've heard it's really good.
Yeah, I disagree.
I've seen that is a polarizing game from what I've seen. Some people love it, some people hate it.
Listen, I've come to the conclusion that the Star Fox games up until 64 are the only good games, and then everything else has just been Miyamoto trying to remake the first 3 games over and over again and failing every time.
It's hard too because the first like 2 or 3 games are so simplistic. And I don't mean that in a shitty way. I just mean like it's hard to make those games now because game design has evolved so much. So how do you evolve that genre with it? And it's hard because the genre, it doesn't feel like there's a lot of room to grow with it.
There
But I also
yeah, I mean you're right. You're 100% right. And you like so like the Nintendo Switch Online has given me the opportunity to play the first 2 Star Fox games. Is that
yeah,
correct?
because there was Star Fox and then Star Fox 2, which was canceled at the time, even though it was pretty much like basically done. And then obviously it released on the Super Nintendo Mini. And then you have Star Fox 64, which was obviously released. So the public only got to play Star Fox 64 and Star Fox 1 originally.
Right, but both Star Fox 1 and 2 are
Nintendo
on
Online.
yeah, am I correct?
I
Am I
think
correct
you're
in
right.
saying that?
I think you're right, but I honestly don't remember. Well, you know what?
Uh
I mean, hold on. I can look it up. Hold on.
yeah.
Yeah, it's on. Both of them are on Switch.
Yeah. So Star Fox 64 is essentially a remake of Star Fox 1, right? And
I don't know, but it's basically they're very similar.
it feels the same and the progression feels the same. With Star Fox 2, there was a Star Fox game on the 3DS. I forget what it was called.
Star Fox Assault.
No, Star Fox Assault was the game.
Was that the GameCube one?
Yeah. I'm gonna look it up real quick. I don't remember if it was like 3DS or just the DS, but it
Star
was
Fox 64 3D.
no, it's definitely not it. That's
That's
definitely not it. There was another Star Fox game.
All right, hold on. Maybe
Star Fox Command. Star Fox Command. That's what it was.
That's what it is. Okay.
So it was on the DS. So Star Fox Command is just Star Fox 2 remade.
Oh, I did not know that.
And I played Star Fox Command when I worked at GameStop. And then I played Star Fox 2, I want to say about a year ago, and I'm playing it and I'm like, and it's explaining the mechanics to me. And I'm like, I played this before. And then I realized, I was like, this is Star Fox Command. This is exactly like Star Fox Command. So Nintendo has been stuck remaking the same 2 games over and over again. And then the few times that they do try to like branch out and do something different, it ends up terrible, terrible. I like Star Fox Assault. The stuff in this in the vehicles are fun, but then you get on land and it's like not fun at all.
Yeah, that's what I mean, like I said, I feel like it's a very polarizing game because it's, like British Bond actor oh my god, British Bond addict here says it's criminally underrated. So I feel like it's just one of those games where it's just you love it or you hate it. There's not a lot of in between where
Yeah,
it's like, yeah, it's not bad. I kind of like it. It's more just like, no, it's one of my favorite games or it's one of my least favorite.
yeah, definitely.
So next one we have is 007 Islander on Instagram. I traded a Game Boy Advance and the Everything or Nothing GBA game for a full GameCube set. Needless to say, the guy's mother wasn't impressed and he had to give it back. Oh man, the poor soul.
Oh no.
uh,
Oh man.
this next one's just very quick. From McCoy Brothers Production on Instagram, McCoy Bros Production.
Uh,
First played the GameCube 19 years ago. Simple and sweet. That's all it is.
yeah.
Played it
Yeah.
19 years ago, so just a year after release. And the final one I think you'll appreciate, Veach. Beautiful Joe, what a beautiful game. And Metroid Prime, what a great way in it says what a great way into 3D, but I think he's saying like what a great entry for Metroid into
Yeah.
3D in general.
Yeah, for sure. I
And
never
that's from
beat
Where's My 40 Acre.
I never beat any of the Metroid Prime games. I have them both on the GameCube, and I played the first one a little bit. It's definitely fun. Very very slow paced.
Hmm.
Surprisingly slow paced.
I don't mind that though, because I remember playing it like one thing Metroid Prime does really well is the atmosphere. I mean, it does a lot of
Yeah,
things well, but one of my favorite things is like the atmosphere of that game is so interesting.
yeah, for sure.
Like, and it's something that the Metroid games have always been good at, where they do so well with environmental storytelling. Though I think Metroid Prime goes a little bit too far with a lot of dialogue or a lot of text reading with to get a lot of the lore. But even so, it builds the lore out really well in that game, and they do a lot through just environmental storytelling, and that game is nothing but like it's probably its greatest strength is its environmental storytelling.
Hmm. I and also just visually, it looks really nice with like just the HUD
It
and
still looks really good.
yeah, I think they did a great job with that game. It's definitely something I want to go back and actually finish. I'm like trying to work through my backlog, but it's almost impossible.
Same. I've been playing through Mario versus Donkey Kong Miniland Mayhem for the first time on the DS.
Yeah.
It's pretty good. It's pretty good. That's one of my backlog that I've been working through.
Oh my god, my handheld. Oh god, we're getting into collecting again. My handheld collection is so small and just uninteresting. I'm like scared to start. I'm scared to start like really investing in it. I think I'm just gonna stick to consoles for a bit.
There's some good stuff out there, but we can talk more about it
Yeah,
off mic. So we are at the end of our GameCube episode. At 20 years, man, it's wild. And right now we're about 2 hours and 5 minutes of recording, though I believe
we
we
took
had a
some
couple break.
breaks.
We took
Yeah,
some
so
breaks, so we're still gonna be. It's still a good chunk of an episode, a good long episode. I think one that's worthy of the GameCube and one that's worthy of its 20th anniversary. So dude, Veach, thank you so much for joining me on this episode. This was a lot of fun to kind of go down memory lane with the GameCube with you.
yeah. Thank you for having me. I mean, I really enjoyed the system, and I'm glad that I feel like so many people now are really getting to appreciate it more and more. It was like you said, it was really underrated, and now that it is getting some love and attention, it's really nice to know that there's more people out there appreciating what the GameCube is.
Are there any final thoughts that you have, or any? And if not, where can the good people find you online?
The only final thought, or I guess the only final regret pertaining to GameCube, is that I wish I didn't have the platinum GameCube. I kind of miss the purple GameCube. I
Okay, so
had
you have like a silver one.
I had a purple GameCube, and my brother broke it. Surprisingly, GameCubes were supposed to be indestructible, but my brother managed to break it. So
I mean, yeah.
when I went to go get a replacement, they only had the silver ones in stock. So I kind of wish I still had the OG purple, but unfortunately not. That's my final thought and regret in regards to GameCube.
I had.
It's
Oh,
mhm.
sorry. Finish. I cut you off.
Yeah.
Yeah, your social media. Where can people find you online?
I do have a Twitter at bite size pixel underscore in between each words, but mostly if you want to find me, I have a YouTube channel which is bite size pixel. That's where I upload content, mostly Nintendo stuff. Um, yeah, that's what I do.
I'll make sure to include a link in the show notes. And what I was going to say was, I have a black GameCube,
Mm.
and there was one final interesting tidbit of GameCube history. There is a non-Nintendo GameCube that was released by Panasonic. It was like the GameCube Q or something like that.
Mm.
I'm gonna double check on the name of that, but the Panasonic Q, that was what it was called, and it was a hybrid GameCube and commercial DVD player. They're very rare and very hard to find now, because they did not sell well at all. But yeah, so Panasonic is owned by the same company that helped Nintendo develop its proprietary discs for the GameCube. So involving the deal with that is how they were able to get the rights to produce their own GameCube called the Panasonic Q, and didn't do well, but it's worth a lot of money now if you have one. So, yeah. Sorry, were you going to say something?
I was gonna say, were those locked to a specific region? Were those like Japan only sales? Because I've never heard of them here in the U.S.
I don't know. I would assume it wasn't locked. But I don't really know. I'd have to see. Oh wait, hold on. No, announced by Panasonic on October 19th, 2001. It was released exclusively in Japan on December 14th.
There you
So
go.
yes, it was only in Japan, which is why we never got it over here in the U.S. Which also makes it that much harder to get your hands on because you probably will have to import it.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so that's it for this episode. As usual, you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Still Loading Pod on all of them. If you want to support the show, please go to my Patreon, patreon.com/Still Loading Pod. Even just $1 a month will help grow the show. And for that dollar, you will get episodes a couple days early, as well as access to the patron exclusive Discord. And at the $5 a month level, you will get all of that, as well as a monthly blog and a monthly bonus audio segment, usually just something me kind of talking about what I'm playing currently, maybe some gaming topic thoughts that just don't fit into episodes, but it'll, just a short little segment so you get a little bit extra content for the little bit of extra money that you're throwing my way. So if you want to support the show, please consider doing that. Otherwise, just give it a 5-star rating review on Apple Podcasts or whichever podcasting app you use. And the most important shout out is the Bit by Bit Foundation. The Bit by Bit Foundation is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to put video games and video game consoles in the hands of kids receiving inpatient care at hospitals. So if you have limited funds, don't go to my Patreon, go to these guys and check them out and consider donating to them. bitbybitfoundation.org. And that will do it for this episode of Still Loading. That will do it for the 20th anniversary episode of the GameCube. Veach, once again, thank you for joining me.
Again, thank you so much. It was a lot of fun. It's always fun chatting and BSing about video games.
Dude, I love having you on. So I will obviously have you back on in the future we'll figure out something,
Yeah,
but
for sure, for sure.
and that will do it. So I will see you all next time.